Rust and redemption. Thomas Mercer wiped beads of sweat from his brow as the late August sun beat down mercilessly on his back. The shovel in his hands felt heavier with each thrust into the stubborn soil of his backyard. What had started as a simple project to install a small koi pond had evolved into something far more labor-intensive when his shovel struck what he assumed was bedrock. After 3 weekends of digging, Thomas was determined to break through or work around whatever obstacle lay beneath. "One more try before I call it quits," he muttered to himself, driving the shovel downward with renewed vigor. This time, instead of the dull thud he'd grown accustomed to, the tool produced a hollow, metallic sound that sent a shiver up his spine despite the heat. Thomas dropped to his knees, scraping away soil with his bare hands until his fingers brushed against something smooth and curved. 20 minutes of frantic digging revealed the edge of what appeared to be an old metal door, its surface covered in rust and embedded in concrete. "What the hell?" he whispered, heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. After retrieving a crowbar from his garage, Thomas managed to pry the heavy door open, revealing a narrow set of concrete stairs descending into darkness. The stale air that rushed out carried decades of isolation. Thomas had purchased the modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Pittsburgh just 6 months earlier after his divorce. At 42, starting over hadn't been part of his life plan, but Catherine's affair with her yoga instructor had forced his hand. The house, built in the 1950s, had been within his budget only because it needed considerable work, a project to keep his mind occupied during the lonely evenings and weekends. The real estate agent had mentioned nothing about an underground structure, and the home inspection hadn't flagged anything unusual. Standing at the threshold of this unexpected discovery, Thomas felt the first genuine excitement he'd experienced since before his marriage had crumbled. "In for a penny, in for a pound," he said, clicking on his flashlight and beginning his descent. The staircase led to a small antechamber with concrete walls. A heavy metal door with an old-fashioned combination lock blocked further entry. Above the door, faded letters spelled out, "Fallout Shelter." Thomas realized he'd stumbled upon one of the many private bunkers built during the height of Cold War paranoia, a relic of a time when nuclear annihilation seemed imminent. The combination lock posed a problem. Thomas spent an hour trying various combinations before heading back to the house to research. Online forums dedicated to mid-century architecture suggested common combinations for such locks often included installation dates or the owner's birth year. A trip to the county records office the next morning revealed the original owner had been Harold Jenkins, born in 1915, who had built the house in 1953. That evening, Thomas tried 1915 on the lock. Nothing. Then 1-9-5-3. The lock remained stubbornly closed. On a hunch, Thomas tried 0806, August 6th, the date the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The lock clicked open. The shelter beyond was surprisingly spacious, roughly 400 square feet of underground living space. Dust-covered furnishings included bunk beds, a small kitchenette, a ham radio setup, and rows of storage shelves stocked with supplies. The air was musty but breathable, thanks to a ventilation system that somehow still functioned. Thomas marveled at the engineering as he explored, his flashlight revealing decades of undisturbed preparation for a disaster that never came. In the corner furthest from the entrance sat a large, olive-green safe with a dial lock. Unlike everything else in the shelter, the safe showed signs of regular cleaning, its surface relatively dust-free, compared to its surroundings. "Someone was down here more recently," Thomas said aloud, his voice sounding hollow in the concrete room. The county records showed Harold Jenkins had lived in the house until his death in 1998 at the age of 83. His children had sold the property, which had changed hands twice more before Thomas purchased it. Had the old man continued to maintain the shelter right up until his death? And more importantly, what was in the safe that warranted such attention? Thomas spent a week cleaning the shelter during his evenings after work, documenting his findings and researching fallout shelters online. He discovered a journal hidden beneath one of the mattresses, filled with Harold's meticulous entries, spanning from 1953 to 1997. Most entries detailed mundane shelter maintenance, but several passages caught Thomas's attention. April 18, 1962. The agency requested another secure location. I've complied. The agreement stands. November 25, 1963. After Dallas, security protocols heightened. Additional materials stored as requested. July 19, 1969. Moon landing successful. Public story holding. Primary contents remain secure. Thomas found himself falling down a rabbit hole of Cold War conspiracy theories. What agency? What agreement? What public story about the moon landing? The journal entries grew more cryptic and infrequent through the years, with the final entry dated just weeks before Harold's death. December the 12th, 1997. No contact for 15 years now. I believe they've forgotten, or those who knew have passed on. I've decided the contents belong to whoever finds them. The combination is where it all began for me. Forgive an old soldier his secrets. The safe's combination eluded Thomas for days. He tried dates from World War II, Korean War battles, Cold War milestones. Nothing worked. He scoured the journal for clues, eventually focusing on the line, "Where it all began for me." According to records, Harold had served in the Army during World War II, enlisting shortly after Pearl Harbor. On a hunch, Thomas tried 1207, December 7th, 1941. The safe remained locked. Thomas pored through the journal again and found a reference to Harold's first mission on June 6th, 1944, D-Day. He tried 0606, nothing. Nearly ready to give up, Thomas remembered finding an old photograph tucked inside the journal. It showed a much younger Harold in uniform, standing beside several other soldiers against a backdrop of ruins. The back of the photo was stamped, Bastogne, January 45. Thomas tried 0145. The safe's mechanism clicked, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were gold bars, dozens of them. Each was marked with a stamp reading 1 kilogram fine gold and a Nazi eagle symbol. Beneath the gold bars were several leather pouches containing loose diamonds and other gemstones. A sealed manila envelope sat atop the treasure. Thomas opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a typewritten letter dated March 1946. Lieutenant Jenkins. The enclosed items represent a portion of recovered assets from Operation Eagle's Nest. As discussed, these particular items cannot be officially documented due to their origin and the sensitive diplomatic situations involved. Your exemplary service and discretion have been noted at the highest levels. These assets are considered compensation for the classified nature of your mission and the understanding that you will never speak of what you witnessed. This arrangement has been approved through channels that will remain unspecified. Consider this matter closed. The letter was unsigned. Thomas sat on the shelter floor, surrounded by what he estimated to be millions of dollars in Nazi gold and looted valuables. Spoils of war unofficially gifted to a young soldier who had apparently been involved in something the U.S. government wanted, kept quiet. His mind raced with the implications. Had Harold been part of a unit that discovered hidden Nazi treasure? Had he been ordered to keep quiet about something witnessed during the war? The moral weight of the discovery pressed down on Thomas, heavier than the gold itself. The fortune came with complications. The provenance was questionable at best, potentially connected to Holocaust victims. International laws regarding Nazi-looted assets had evolved considerably since 1946. Beyond the legal issues were the ethical considerations. Was this blood money? Could Thomas in good conscience claim ownership? For weeks, Thomas kept the discovery to himself, continuing his normal routine while spending evenings researching Nazi gold, restitution laws, and historical claims. He read about families still searching for assets stolen during the Holocaust. He learned about the challenges of proving ownership of such items and the international agreements governing their return. The fortune that might have once seemed like the answer to all his problems now represented a moral crucible. Thomas realized the discovery was testing not just his honesty, but his humanity. 3 months after his initial discovery, Thomas contacted an attorney specializing in international law and historical restitution. Together, they approached the Holocaust Museum with documentation of the find. What followed was a complex process of authentication, historical research, and legal navigation. Much of the gold was eventually traced to a specific bank in Frankfurt that had been looted in 1944, with records indicating the assets had belonged primarily to Jewish families. The diamonds were more difficult to trace, but experts identified cutting styles consistent with workshops in Amsterdam that had been seized by Nazi authorities. The restitution process would take years, but Thomas never regretted his decision. In lieu of a finder's fee, which he refused, the museum established a scholarship fund in his name for children of Holocaust survivors. The story made headlines briefly. Man finds Nazi loot in backyard bunker, returns it to rightful owners. But public interest soon faded. Thomas found himself at peace with his choice, though his bank account remained as modest as ever. The shelter became Thomas's workshop, where he pursued his long-dormant interest in woodworking. On quiet evenings, surrounded by tools instead of treasure, he sometimes thought about Harold Jenkins and wondered if the old soldier would have approved of his decision. One evening, while organizing Harold's journal and papers for donation to a historical society, Thomas found a folded note he'd previously overlooked, tucked in the binding. The true wealth was never in the safe, but in what I chose to do with it. Choose wisely. Thomas smiled, running his fingers over the faded handwriting. Perhaps Harold had intended all along for the finder to face the same moral test he himself had confronted decades earlier. The real treasure, Thomas decided, had been the opportunity to prove, perhaps mostly to himself, that some things were worth more than gold.